Bulavinaka, and welcome to the launch of Rising Tide, an anthology of Pacific poems for use in secondary schools in the teaching of human rights and social justice. The EU representative, Ms. Galia Agisheva, Head of Political, Trade and Information for the European Union in the Pacific. Dame Meg Taylor, Secretary General of Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat. Dr. Audrey Amua, Deputy Director General of the Pacific Community, Professor Pal Aluwalia, Vice Chancellor and President here at the University of the South Pacific, Mr. Miles Young, Director of the Regional Rights Resource Team of the Pacific Community, Your Excellencies, Heads of UN agencies, Acting Permanent Secretary for the Fiji Ministry of Education, Heritage and Arts, and representatives of the Fiji Ministry for Education, Heritage and Arts, members of the Diplomatic Corps, students, poets, artists, Oceania Center students and artists, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. Before we begin, perhaps a bit of housekeeping. For those who might be visiting the venue for the first time, the conveniences are very close by. For our dignitaries and invited guests, they're just through these doors. And for our other guests today, if you make your way just up the stairs, outside the theater, and walk through the large glass doors at the top of the staircase, you will see the very clear large signs. Also, please remember, eating is not permitted in the ICT theater, although an exception is usually made for water. Please do check to see that your phone is on silent mode. And finally, please refrain from flash photography during the performances. Thank you. And now for the task at hand. Before we begin with our formalities, we have a small treat for you. The Oceania Center's Pacifica Voices will perform a chant composed by one of our senior artists, Elisapedi Buenimasi, with musical arrangement with Selai Wainingolo. A brief description from the artist reads, "The chant, Wasa Wasa or Ocean, speaks of a personal inspiration about the journey of life, its ups and downs, and the many mountains that we encounter. It speaks of the loss of loved ones and what we treasure along the way. Despite these challenges, we are grateful for the journey and the experiences and for all that we have. In our gratitude, we give thanks to God-given gifts, and we remember always that we are connected. We remember our emotional connection to the ocean and to the land. Wasa Wasa speaks of this. My island, my vanua, my home, my identity to be known." The second piece is an original choreography by Moira Samisoni, performed by the Oceania Dance Theatre. The dance piece is titled Hope, and it speaks of the resilience of youth and the challenges faced by young people during the COVID-19 pandemic. This piece gives voice to the youth experience of helplessness and their struggle to find balance through crisis and fear. Ladies and gentlemen, an ocean of hope.
Ladies and gentlemen, in the early hours of this morning, Thursday, the 19th of March, Fiji confirmed its first case of the novel coronavirus, known as COVID-19. This is an event we have expected and spent months preparing for, and I'd like to say that it is an event we are dealing with decisively. The patient in question was identified, isolated, and tested Tuesday evening at the Lotoko Hospital. The patient remains under close medical supervision and he is in stable condition. The case was transmitted while he was traveling aboard, and I would also like to say that there remain 0 confirmed cases of local transmission in Fiji.
But there is hope.
Held my hand out and asked for something free. I got pride I could roll up for miles in front of me. I don't need your help and I don't need sympathy. I don't need you to lower the bar for me. I know I'm superwoman, I know I'm strong. I know I've got this cause I've had it all along. I'm phenomenal and I'm enough. I don't need you to tell me who to be. Give someone, just hold me. Don't fix me, don't try to change a thing. Give someone, just know me. Cause underneath, I'm broken and it's beautiful. Hey, I'm broken and it's beautiful. I'm broken and it's beautiful. I'm broken like I'm failing and I'm losing my mind. Can someone just hold me? Don't fix me, don't try to change a thing. Oh, someone just know me, 'cause underneath I'm broken and it's beautiful. 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 It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I'm broken and it's beautiful. It's beautiful. I'm broken and it's beautiful.
As many of us are aware, the arts are a powerful medium of communication. Not only do they provide an avenue to express our innermost feelings, they are a wonderful platform for social learning. The book, which will be launched today, makes an important contribution to education on multiple fronts. It presents an opportunity for young children in the region to talk about very difficult issues and concerns. They will also see themselves in the Pacific names, the voices, and the narratives in the collection. It is through literature and the arts that societies capture their narratives, and sadly, in the Pacific, this is lacking. We don't encourage the arts at school, and we overemphasize academic learning. The large gap between the first two waves of Pacific literature and where we are today continues to grow, and this is in large part due to the fact that we don't have publishing opportunities in the region. And other than that, there's very little support for the arts and emerging artists. We are therefore extremely grateful for the resources and the teams that made this initiative possible. So without further ado, and to begin with the formalities, it is my pleasure to formally introduce our chief guest this afternoon, the EU representative, Ms. Galia Agisheva, Head of Political, Trade and Information for the European Union in the Pacific. She has a bachelor's degree in philology and a master's degree in law, having graduated from Latvian University and Cambridge University. Before joining the European institutions, she was a lawyer in the private sector and lectured part-time on the law of the European Union in a number of higher education establishments in Latvia. She then became a civil servant and worked in the legal department of the Competition Council of Latvia. In 2006, she worked in the European Commission, the Directorate General for External Relations. She was with the European External Action Service since 2011, working in the division covering Central Asia. And prior to assuming her current role in the European Union delegation for the Pacific, 2 years ago, she served 4 years in the European Union delegation in Moscow. Please welcome Ms. Galia Agisheva.
The University of South Pacific Vice Chancellor Professor Aluvalia, Dr. Audrey Amur, Deputy Director General of the Pacific Community, Mr. Young, SPC RRT Director, representatives of the Ministry of Education, heads of UN agencies, Your Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, poets, artists, students, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to you all. I'm honored and delighted to be here this afternoon on behalf of the delegation of the European Union for the Pacific for the launch of the Rising Tide Poetry Anthology. We applaud Approaching Human Rights and Social Justice as a collection of poems. It is a brilliant idea, as emphasized by Ambassador of the European Union, Sujilo Siem, in the foreword to this anthology. This project is about human rights, poetry, creativity, and I will touch upon those three in the next 10 minutes. Let me start with the human rights and recall that human rights and social justice are the core values of the European Union, which is founded on engagement to promote and protect human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. The European Union views all human rights as universal, indivisible, and interdependent. Social justice is a cornerstone implemented through the principles of cohesion and solidarity. We are convinced that sustainable peace and stability, long-term development and prosperity cannot exist without respect for human rights. And this commitment underpins all internal and external policies of the European Union. The European Union has a long-standing partnership with the Pacific, and the areas of our engagement with partner countries and civil society range from oceans governance, climate change action, environment, management of waste and renewable energy, to the promotion of human rights and strengthening the regional trade and economic integration. The European Union stands in solidarity with our Pacific friends during this pandemic and provides support to mitigate the crisis, the impact of the crisis on the economy and people, including support to women who are particularly vulnerable in this time of crisis. Empowerment of women, gender equality, non-discrimination, support to the most vulnerable, the values which surge through this anthology are among the priority or cross-cutting issues of the cooperation program we have in place. Many poems in this book address the problem of violence against women and girls, which remains one of the most widespread and devastating human rights violations across the globe, and also here in the Pacific. The effects of such violence include shame, silence, and stigma, which allow it to escalate. Violence is a barrier to gender equality, women's empowerment, and overall development. And the EU is committed to work tirelessly with our partners in the region to strengthen legal frameworks and institutions, supporting development and education, addressing the root causes of violence and promoting women empowerment, and has funded unique multi-donor, multi-stakeholder regional programs, such as the Pacific Partnership to End Violence Against Women and Girls and the Spotlight Initiative. The Pacific Partnership brings together governments, civil society organizations, communities, and other partners to promote gender equality, prevent violence against women and girls, increase access to quality response services for survivors. The action is focusing on education, formal and informal, primary prevention and access to essential services, and support to civil society to advocate, monitor, and report. We have collaborated in this initiative with Australian and New Zealand governments and the UN Women. The publication that is being launched today is an outcome of the Regional Rights Resource Team Social Citizenship Education Program for school children under the Pacific Partnership Program. And this brings me back to poetry and creativity. The anthology is unique for a number of reasons. It not only collates poems on human rights and social justice, but introduces readers to the types of poetry and poetic devices. To enhance understanding of concepts of human rights and social justice, there is a section on what those are. The poems are complemented by artwork that expresses the key themes and messages of the poems through art. All these elements, along with reflection questions for each poem, work together to inspire readers to think deeply about these critical issues and take action. This collection of the Pacific poems will undoubtedly generate inspiration for the young generation for which it is aimed. This young generation is the rising tide of the Pacific, who can become the true fundamental agents of change of attitudes in their lives, in their families, in their communities, in their countries, and also globally. As the saying goes, the tide will always turn at the set time. Human rights are always a work in progress, and the poems in this anthology remind us what brings us together as human beings beyond all our differences, and that we all can contribute to positive change. The poetry, appealing directly to our hearts, makes us feel the real life behind what may at times seem human rights abstractions or dry report or statistics. Feel emotion and compassion, be inspired also to change personal attitudes and make our societies everywhere better places. I would like to thank everyone who is associated with this anthology, the poets, the artists, the editor, RRT team, UN Women and USP, for all the efforts in making this unique anthology into a reality. The European Union is proud to have supported this initiative. And since this is a poetry anthology, I would like to conclude this speech with a quote about the power of poetry by Aristotle, a philosopher and one of the greatest intellectual figures of Western history. Poetry is the revelation of a feeling that the poet believes to be interior and personal, and which the reader recognizes as his own. This is what I felt when reading this book, and I am sure that other readers will find it as inspiring as I have. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for your kind words, Ms. Agisheva. We acknowledge the EU's support in the Pacific region, and especially towards this initiative, and for making other rights-based social justice and development work possible, as well as the much-needed COVID response interventions in these difficult times. Our next speaker this afternoon is none other than Professor Paul Ahluwalia, the Vice-Chancellor and President here at the University of the South Pacific, a role that he commenced on 1st January last year. His special interest is to promote a culture of strong research and innovation with continuous improvement in the volume, quality, and impact of research and enterprise outputs and partnerships. He holds a Bachelor and Master of Arts from the University of Saskatchewan and completed his PhD at Flinders University. He spent 14 years at Adelaide University, finishing as Professor of the Politics Department. Professor Ahluwalia has previously been a visiting professor at the University of California, Berkeley, and with the Goldsmiths College at the University of London, where he was also director of the Center for Postcolonial Studies. He was also a professor at UC San Diego. Professor Ahluwalia has a prolific publication profile and is the sole author of 4 books. He has edited and co-edited a number of journals, including 3 Routledge journals: Social Identities, African Identities, and Sikh Formations. Professor Ahluwalia, please.
Galia Agisheva, representing the EU. I don't see Dave McTaylor, but Dave McTaylor, Audrey Auma, Miles Young, Director of the Regional Rights Resource Team, Your Excellencies, heads of UN agencies, the Acting Permanent Secretary for the Fijian Ministry of Education and representatives of the Fijian Ministry of Education, members of the Diplomatic Corps, our students, poets, artists, and Oceania Center students and artists, and of course, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. Bula Vinaka, namaste, and welcome to the University of the South Pacific. I think it was a real treat for all of those who've been missing the Pacifica Voices and the Oceania Dance Theater to see them back today after quite a long time. And really, let's join and give them a warm thank you again. It's a real pleasure to be here for the launch of Rising Tide by SPC's Regional Rights Resource Team, and the university is proud to have partnered in the publishing of this anthology of Pacific poetry on human rights and social justice through engagement of the Oceania Center. But it's not just the Oceania Center. I think many of our departments have also been involved in different ways and through different bits of partnerships, both with SPC, but also with the EU, particularly in terms of the social citizenship education project, but also through the PIOMP project. But I think this particular collaboration is not just another example of crop collaboration, but also it's something about the long history of Pacific publications through the Institute of Pacific Studies, now the Oceania Center. And I think it's carrying on then that tradition to make sure that that questions which are often uncomfortable can be addressed in some very humane and interesting media. And so we're really pleased to be involved in this. And given the context of social issues in the region and the sensitivity around human rights, arts-based learning, we think, is incredibly relevant in providing creative, safe spaces for the teaching and learning of human rights. And I commend the team for this initiative. The themes of equality, non-discrimination, and treating people fairly, social inclusion, protecting marginalized and vulnerable people, social justice, human rights, and the eliminating violence against women, girls, and children are timeless, and the intergenerational dialogue between old and new writing, I think, really speaks to this. So I really want to thank the European Union for its continued development support in the region for the program, facilitated by the crop agencies. The collaboration is also a reminder of the importance of the arts and culture in Pacific-led and homegrown arts and recognition of the artists. This is something that the university has committed itself to do, not just through the Oceania Center, but also through the School of Languages, Arts and Media's Pacific Writing Forum, which has encouraged the emerging Pacific Island writers through publication readings and poetry slams. The partnership is also fitting given that the editor of the book, Dr. Francis Mangubai, editor, is also a former USB staff member who made significant contributions to Pacific literacy through the book Flood Initiative, for instance, in the late 1970s and the early 1980s. I guess I want to, before I finish, I want to actually use my own, as Francis noted, that my work is predominantly in post-colonial theory, and we are living in a post-colonial region, and I want to perhaps think about what one of the greatest post-colonial theorists, Gayatri Spivak, has noted, when she talks about the fact that the subaltern cannot speak. Now, when Spivak talks about the subaltern cannot speak, she's referring to the marginalization, she borrows that notion of the subaltern. For those of you who want the academic reference, of course from Gramsci, but I think what she's really trying to get at is how is it that we get people who are saying something to listen to them. It's often they're so marginalized that we never hear their voices. And I think this book is in that tradition, that these are people who are speaking, and we're finally giving them voice, giving them an opportunity. The responsibility really lies with us of how we listen and respond to this. And what was really interesting just in the few minutes I've had to flick through the book is just the diversity of voices that are in this book. And I think the challenge really is for all of us, not only in the university, in SPC, but in all the government agencies, to say, well, these people are really speaking out, and they want to be heard, and they have specific issues that are real challenges to our societies. And so it's something that we've got to really come together and address, not just have a book launch and then forget about it. I think this is something that I would really encourage all of us to really think about moving forward. So not very often that I get to speak about Spivak, but there we go. The arts really play a critical role in education and in social discourse. And at the basic education level, I think, Gali also pointed this out, the arts have been seen to enhance the fine motor skills and hand-eye coordination as well. They strengthen problem-solving skills, complex analysis, and critical and creative thinking. And this is what I think also our School of Education and the Oceania Center in combination really work on and think about. And in challenging situations such as a COVID pandemic, which was so beautifully captured in that opening segment. I think that it's in the face of these sorts of developmental challenges and social ills and the reality of climate change that the arts provide us an avenue through which we might reflect the state of our human existence. So I really commend everybody on the publication of this book. I hope you really take some time to read it and reflect on it. And a very big thank you to all the people who have contributed to this wonderful collection. Banaka Vekalevu, Dhanyawad, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ahluwalia, and thank you especially for the reminder that this work must continue beyond events such as this. I think in the Pacific all too often, sometimes we become a little complacent, but exciting discussions behind the scenes about how this work can be taken forward, working specifically with teachers and giving them the skills to integrate across the curriculum. So it's very exciting, the kinds of work that's being discussed. I now have the pleasure of inviting Mr. Miles Young, the Director of the Regional Rights Resource Team at the Pacific Community, to present his remarks. Born and raised in Fiji, Miles has over 25 years of professional experience, largely working as a rule of law development practitioner across the Pacific, Asia, and Africa. He joined SPC following roles with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, and Western Sydney University in Australia, the Australian government-funded Australia-Indonesia Partnership for Justice Program in Indonesia, bit of a mouthful, and the International Development Law Organization in Australia and Italy, as well as in private legal practice in Fiji, Australia, and Indonesia. He has worked on a wide range of substantive areas, including access to justice and legal aid, legal and economic empowerment of communities, women's rights and gender equality, constitution making, judicial administration, human rights, international trade law, agriculture law, and food security. He holds degrees in politics and law from the University of Sydney.
Navalevu, Francis, for your kind introduction. And Nilesh, I told you, short introduction, please. He never listens to me. I duly note that all protocols have been observed, and I acknowledge the performances by the Oceania Center and the addresses by Ms. Agisheva and Professor Pal. The Pacific Community SPC, through its Human Rights Program, the Regional Rights Resource Team, is extremely proud to partner with the University of the South Pacific in producing this anthology, Rising Tide. The anthology is about Pacific poets writing about human rights and social justice issues in the context of the Pacific. And it's also, as Professor Pal mentioned, it's writing about these issues in a very accessible way for Pacific people and beyond as well. The poets are about values and principles that are timeless and should matter to us all. Equality, respect, non-discrimination, being inclusive, social justice, and of course gender equality and ending violence against women, girls, and children. These are values and principles that matter if we want our children and our children's children in all their diversities to thrive and reach their full potential in life. These are values and principles that matter if we want our Blue Pacific to develop in a sustainable way and reach its fullest potential. This anthology that we are launching was produced under the Pacific Partnership to End Violence Against Women and Girls, and Ms. Agisheva has mentioned a little bit about it, but I seek your indulgence, if I may, to explain what this important program is about. It's a multi-year program which brings together governments, civil society organizations, schools, communities, and other partners from across our region, across the Blue Pacific, to promote gender equality, prevent violence against women and girls, and ensure that women and girls who are experiencing violence can access the services they need to effectively respond to such violence. It has three outcome areas. Outcome one is about strengthening young people's understanding and appreciation of gender equality and the need to end violence. And work under outcome one is with schools, it's with school children, and it's with school communities. And the anthology we're launching today is an activity under this outcome. Leading outcome work is the SBC Regional Rights Resource Team, probably better known as RRT, and I acknowledge Nilesh Gounder and his team. I also acknowledge two other SBC divisions that are contributing to the work under this outcome. It's the Social Development Program at SBC and also the Education Division, and I'm not sure if I have colleagues in the audience, but I acknowledge them. Outcome two of the partnership is implemented by UN Women, and I see Sandra Bernklau and also Abigail Erickson and her team. They're here. This outcome also focuses on strengthening understanding and appreciation of gender equality and the need to end violence, but in the wider community. And it also focuses on ensuring that women and girls who experience violence can easily access the services that I mentioned earlier. Services such as those offered by the Fiji Women's Crisis Center, for example. And I acknowledge Shamima Ali, head of the Crisis Center, who's been an inspiration for those working in this space for many years. Outcome three of the partnership is implemented by the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat, and I acknowledge Dame Meg Taylor, Secretary General of PIFS, and her team. I see Seema is here, and also Katerina. I can't see that far, Katerina, but I think you're here. And this outcome is about supporting civil society organizations to ensure that our governments and our institutions really meet their commitments to enhance gender equality and prevent violence, particularly against women and girls. Of course, we're here today to launch the anthology, and it would not be possible without the generous support of donors, the European Union, as well as the governments of Australia and New Zealand and UN Women. Nava Levu to representatives who are here today. A lot of hard work and collaboration went into producing the anthology. To USB, Dr. Koya and her team at the Oceania Center, thank you for collaborating in the production of the anthology. Vice Chancellor, we look forward to USB using this resource in its courses, perhaps in education, Pacific literature, training of teachers. I acknowledge the presence of Fiji National University and the University of Fiji, and I hope these institutions of higher learning will also do the same within their institutions. And thank you to the Ministry of Education for being here. Perhaps we can work together to have the anthology used as a resource for your English literature classes in years 7 to 10. Dr. Francis Mangubai and his daughter Jeshu, who's in our team, thank you for his tireless efforts as editor. You know, he had the enjoyable task of reading through many brilliant poems, but also the unenviable task of having to select but a few of them. So, Dr. Mangubai, thank you. And finally, I just want to thank the students who are here today. It's so good to have you here, because at the end of the day, after all I've said over the past 10 minutes, the key message that I want to leave is that this anthology is for you. Please pick up a copy, read the poems, do the exercises that come with them. It will be an enriching experience, perhaps a transformational one that will lead you to become champions for human rights, gender equality, and of course, ending violence against women and girls. Nava Levu.
Thank you so much for those words, Miles, and I think also for the reminder of who the recipients are and who the project is for. I guess the early conversations really were about how do we come on board to assist the brilliant team with their brilliant project, and to make sure that the target audience connects emotionally with these really difficult and sensitive issues that it's so much easier to be silent about. And so, yeah, I also salute the team and Dr. Francis Magubai. I have to say, Dr. Magubai is one of those icons like Konai who, you know, as a student, a very, very long time ago, these were the big names we'd heard. And as the VC mentioned in his remarks, you know, just totally in awe of the work that he and his team had done in terms of improving literacy in the region, and knowing what we know about PILNA results in the region, how critical that work is, and just being really grateful that we have, in a small part, been able to assist with such a wonderful project, which will also play a role in continuing that work to grow, you know, literacy intervention. So it's been very exciting. Thank you so much for your team. So at this point in the program, we will hear from the editor himself, Dr. Francis Magubai. So I'll hand over now to the tech team and hope that we are ready to play the video.
Good afternoon. I want to actually start off by congratulating the SPC for this initiative, because it's really a very difficult area in which you can preach to people. And we know from past experience that preaching to people about how they should behave has not worked very well. So this approach of trying to get something into the classroom so that the newer generation grow up with maybe having a better understanding of how to be more inclusive in their lives, how to be more inclusive and respecting of differences amongst people. And the best place to start, of course, is with children rather than with adults whose views have largely been formed earlier on. Now, we could have had similar sort of ideas discussed through prose, but prose is not really as powerful as poetry can be. And I'm so pleased, therefore, that the SPC thought of using poetry, and particularly Pacific poets, to tackle the idea of inclusiveness and, if you like, social citizenship in the Pacific area. Now, why poetry? Well, poetry not only deals with ideas, but also with emotions. And these emotions are packaged in very charged language. And it is said that good poetry can often communicate before it is actually understood. And poetry has been always part of an oral culture. And as we all know, the early poetry in every culture has been oral. And in the Pacific context, which has very much an oral culture, poetry fits in very well. And therefore, it's important that poetry that is done in our classroom is read aloud. Now, it has been said that, as I said, poetry does appeal to emotions, and therefore we're hoping that through this book of poems, not only will the students find their feelings are aroused, but that the ideas that are within the poems will make them think about the issues that are discussed by the poets in the poems that they have written. And so we have here, in this case, Pacific poets who will be speaking to Pacific young people. And I think that's a very fine way to try and get this approach to social citizenship into our school systems. So this has been a good opportunity for me to reacquaint myself with all the poets that I knew, but also to meet up with many new ones, and I've enjoyed that particular experience. So I'd like to thank the SPC for this opportunity, and thank Nilesh Gounder, who I liaise with me throughout this project. And I'd also like to thank Jayshree, who planted the idea of taking on this task. Thank you very much.
So I'll let you in on a little secret. I've never actually met Dr. Mangubai, so I was kind of transported into being the geeky student, like listening attentively, because I hadn't watched the video before. Anyway, back to my role now. We will hear from the poets themselves. So we have a treat. We have 4 poets and artists who are featured in the publication. And we have them seated right here. But before I invite them, I've also been asked to mention the interactive online portal, which will be available online in relation to the publication. So it will be available through the SPC website, which will feature videos and interviews with a selection of poets and artists. For those of you who are on social media, please do visit the SPC Facebook page, which also features poets reciting their pieces. I haven't checked today, but up to yesterday, I think 3 poets had been shared, and it's kind of already going viral, so it's pretty exciting to see that there is an excitement around poetry, which most people find just a little bit difficult to consume. So that's been another geeky kind of exciting moment. For those who are interested in getting copies of the book, you may inquire with Nilesh in terms of the copies that are here this afternoon, but we are working to have them available at the USP Book Center, so we may have that conversation later if you're interested. All right, so our poets. Our first poet is a USP undergrad student, Anna Jane Vere from Tonga, with a poem titled Sorry. And so I invite Anna, and please do tell us a little bit about your inspiration, as well as share the poem with us. Thank you, Anna.
Mbulavinaka, malelele, and salutations. My name is Anna Jane Vere, as she had introduced, and this poem is titled Sorry. Yesterday, you came to school, and your eyes were bloody red. I asked to see your homework, but I should have asked if you cried instead. I knew you would lie and say you did not get enough sleep. I could have kept on asking until you opened up to me. Maybe, just maybe, if you knew that someone cared, you would feel that you could talk about the troubles in your hair. Whether your parents fought again or your uncle died that morning, if a pervert on the would it have kept you from falling apart? 5 years later, we are all big girls, and university life is thrilling. But why does it feel like on your shoulders, heavy weights are resting? I brush you off as lazy because of the dragging in your steps. I fail to even wonder whether it was due to lack of rest. No flickering thoughts of homesickness, loneliness, or depression. There is a box labeled short-term memories in my head, and I just tuck you in it. It takes less than a minute to grab your hand and ask, "Are you okay?" So why did I not do that for you on one of those days? Last night, I bumped into you, but you did not recognize me. Well, my hair is a different color now, and there's a growing sprout inside me. But it bothered me so deeply how much you looked the same, only that your lines were sharper and somewhat less flesh on your frame. But I know it was you I saw, breathing, alive. So why am I hearing news? of a woman who took her life? Why does she have the same name? Live in the same place you did? Why does this hurt more when I think that it could have been prevented? I am sorry that I did not see the insincerity of your smile. I am sorry we were not close enough for you to put me on speed dial. I'm sorry that I did not hear the emptiness in your laugh. I'm sorry for not caring to call you out on bluffs. I'm sorry that I did not ask, "How are you?" nearly enough. I'm sorry that I did not think you would also have it rough. I am sorry for the moments when I could have held your hand, but chose to spend it on pointing out all your flaws instead. I am sorry for ignoring the SOS in your eyes, for deceiving both of us that you were actually fine. I'm sorry for being late, my friend, for only realizing it now, that one could still feel lonely, even amidst a crowd. Heed my words, all who hear me, and look out for the signs. Hold her hand, let him know that you care for their lives. I cannot carry you, and you cannot carry me, but hand in hand, side by side, this is how we can be. Together, my friend, together. Malo. Thank you. I hope I made you cry a little too. Weirdly enough, when I wrote this poem, it wasn't actually about someone who committed suicide. During the time I wrote this, my mom's eldest brother, my uncle, he was suffering from motor neuron disease. And we knew that time wasn't a lot. A lot of art is like that. You won't see when I draw something the trauma of sexual harassment. You won't see it. Loneliness. But you will see fear in someone's art. You will see love in someone's art. You will see joy. You will see peace. You will see chaos. And my poem is but one of many. Many masterpieces, many weapons. So that even those who have never experienced the issues we bring up, they will learn to care as we care. They will want to fight as we fight. Whatever your art looks like, whether it's poetry, music, or dance, it is your weapon. Use it wisely. The same way you can speak chaos and anxiety, you can speak joy and peace. Thank you for this opportunity. When I got the email that my poem was chosen, and I saw it the way it looks printed on a page, I cried and I said, "Thank you, Jesus." My voice does matter. Someone will listen. We can make a change, whether we write poems or not. What you do matters. Malolahi, o falahiatu.
Thank you, Anna. Our second poet is Tariq Wazni from Fiji, a postgraduate student with the School of Languages, Arts and Media, and he will speak to us about his poem titled "The Pavement."
No matter how many times I come up here, I still get nervous. It's kind of unfair to go after something like that. You know, makes me want to just walk away. But I'll try and read mine and explain it afterwards. The pavement. Just how does everyone stride past the old frame on the pavement with so much as a glance? His eyes were alive. They put me in a trance. He longed to speak because no one knew his tale or the secrets buried in his pockets. all the dark things that he kept, how in the comfort of night he wept and wept. He carried a leather wallet home to one photograph of the baby that he once nurtured, of the son that had told him to wait here, of the man that had never returned. When he looked at you, his gaze never faltered. His attention was sincere. I thought it unfair for a beggar living on the street to have a heart of gold. He said good things too grow old, and was gone the next day. And how one piece of pavement can feel so much like a grave, I will never understand. Just how did everyone stride past the pavement with God in their hand? Thank you. So when I wrote this poem, my previous employment, I used to play movies for the public. So there was this one particular old man, homeless, who used to attend almost every movie screening. And you know, he'd walk in, he'd stink a little, and he'd sit right at the back so he wouldn't disturb anyone. But I tried to be friendly to all the audiences, so when he'd walk in, I'd talk to him, say hi. And then there was one Saturday, because the movies are played on Saturday, when he walked in and he was carrying a bag. It was a new bag, still in the plastic. And then he came to me and he gave me the bag. And then he said, "You can have this." So I asked him why. That's fine. I don't need a bag. That's okay. And he says, "No, I got this bag for free." He had bought some things. And then he said that I won't be needing the bag. So I took it and I said, "Okay, thank you." And I never saw him again. And it sort of made me realize, when we see homeless people, it could be any one of us. It just takes one bad day. Even homeless people have family that abandoned them, that kicked them out for whatever reason. And there's all these stories that people carry around that none of us have access to unless we speak to them. I don't have words of encouragement that could rival what Anna said, so let's continue writing poetry. Thank you.
Thank you, Tariq. Our third poet needs very little introduction. She's considered by many to be the matriarch of poetry in the region, with generations of secondary school and university students studying and stressing over her many creative works included in the English curriculum and featured in the dreaded national exams. She is none other than Professor Konai Helutheman from Tonga with her poem, My Neighbor.
Thank you, Francis, and I acknowledge all of you who are here, and to say that I'm very honored to be here and very proud to be chosen to be not only part of the anthology but to speak here. My poem is a very simple one. I write very simple poems because I write mainly for young people. And when I was a young person, I hated poetry, particularly difficult poetry. So I decided I would write simple poems so that the young people would be able to understand my poems, particularly when they are forced to read them for the exam. The teachers make them difficult. My neighbor. My neighbor is a very generous man. He pays school fees of needy children every year, provides feasts for his church, and is a supporter of women's rights. Yet I can never understand why he frequently beats up his wife. I don't think I need to talk about this poem, but when I wrote this poem a long time ago, when I was much younger, and I had this feeling where I grew up in Tonga. I've always had this question about people who tell us things as young people, and then they go and do completely the different things. And it always bothered me. It still bothers me. And I try very hard as a teacher to practice what I preach. So this little poem really brings together some of the things I wondered about as a young person. You know, in Tonga in particular, and I think generally in the Pacific, we are very spiritual. We are people of faith. In Tonga, we go to church, as the Pele used to tell us, every day. And on Sunday, we go many times. You talk to Tongans, they know the Bible very well, chapter and verse. And if you have a birthday, or if you get married, or if someone dies, people will always recite the appropriate text from the Bible. So we know a lot about the Bible. However, a lot of us don't live those chapters, those verses. And that used to bother me as someone who grew up in a very churchy family. My ancestors were missionaries. My mom was born in the Solomon Islands where her parents were missionaries. So missionaries, Christianity, church, Bible, you say it, we said it too. And I heard it, and I stood in front of the church and read hymns, sang hymns, demonstrated, danced hymns. But when I looked at what was going on in the real world, I found very little of that. And I wanted the young people to see that too and to discuss this, the gap between what is and what should be. So I hope the children in the school would discuss this among themselves, discuss with adults, because today we see even more examples of the difference between what we say and what we actually do. Malo apito.
So I guess I've been very privileged to have been around Konai for a while now, first as a student and then as a staff member in the same section. So it's been almost 25 years, I think. We've been colleagues. But traveling with Konai is a nightmare because everywhere you go, people either ask her, are you the Konai Elithaimen? Or they will whisper to me or whoever's with her. And then the next would be, can you take a picture? So you, if you know you're going to be traveling with Konai, be ready to be the photographer because whatever accomplishments you've made, no one cares. Trust me. And so, I mean, for the poets in the house, hey, poetry can make you famous too. We refer to her as our rock star. And so we're like, okay, who's going in the Konai party? Can I go in the next car? But jokes aside, we have one final poet before we hear from two of our artists. And we will now hear from Shamil Ali from Fiji with a poem titled The Survivor in Me.
I always say this, tall people problems. The last time I recited this piece was during a poetry slam, which was last year at a bar, which was Onyx. I'm sure most of you would know where that is. I had a few to drink, so the nerves were calm. And you know how poetry slam sort of gives you a leeway to swear, so I got to do that. But given the fact that this was to be published for students, I had to tweak the poetry a bit. I will explain the reason as to why I wrote this at the end of the piece. So here it goes. When I was 5, a boy in my class asked if I was a pufta. Then he laughed and ran towards his friends. You see, back then, I didn't understand what it meant till I reached the age of 9, when I realized it was a derogatory term. And for the longest time, I suffered in silence. I was the boy who got teased for being feminine, the boy who was told to behave like a man, the boy that was asked mean questions, the boy that other kids made fun of, the boy that had to endure physical violence, the boy that you'd bully for your entertainment, the boy who felt like he was serving a harsh sentence for something which shouldn't even be an offense, the boy who thought the classroom was his prison, the boy who thought about consuming poison because that felt like an easier option, rather than going through such a horrible experience, the boy who got pushed around and was shunned. But one day, I stood up for myself and you were stunned. I refused to be a victim and let you mock my presence. So thank you so much for being the reason as to why I had to become such a strong person. Now, you will keep quiet and listen. Listen. You do not have the permission to make someone else feel like a second-class person simply because they do not fall within your version of what's considered to be the normal equation. So I am here to tell you that I'm going to riot for my rights. Rest be assured I am not going out without a fight. I'm not going to let anybody dim my light. Put on your shades because I'm going to shine bright. I'm going to light up the torch and march into the night. I refuse to keep remaining quiet. No, I am not some form of blight. Get your eyes checked if my presence annoys your sight. Your hatred and bigotry will not diminish my might. I'm going to let my colors fly like a loose kite. I refuse to let you paint my life black and white. You say I'm being too loud, but you at the same time say LGBTQI not allowed. Well, listen up. I am part of LGBTQI and proud. So get your head out of the cloud. I refuse to change to fit in with the crowd. I refuse to let your hate have me silenced. You say I'm being too self-centered. You say I am shoving the LGBTQI agenda, but you at the same time disrespect someone's chosen gender. You mock people and wish they were buried 6 feet under. You ask, rather ignorantly, what about straight pride? I ask you, what about it? Have you been bullied, tortured, raped, abused, murdered, criminalized for simply being straight? Have you been told you will enter Hell's Gate for simply being straight? Have you ever had to cry and question your fate for simply being straight? Do you know someone who hung himself to death for simply being straight? So why don't you keep quiet, mate, and be thankful? You don't need a reason to celebrate for simply being straight. So I refuse. I bloody refuse to let your hate get to me. Listen up, I am not going to cower and flee. I'm going to stand tall like the mighty tree. I am going to break all the shackles till I'm free. So bring your knives and your axes and your sticks and your stones. And even if you may succeed in pulling me down, there will rise in another me and another and another and another, till you realize that we actually matter. Thank you. That was a bit nerve-wracking considering that there's so many educated people out there, the people that I look up to that recited before me. So I wrote this piece last year after I read an article about a 12-year-old boy that committed suicide. And the reason for that was because he was being bullied by his friends for being feminine and he just couldn't take it. So one day he wrote a suicide note and he jumped off. He jumped off, you know. So I started reflecting upon this incident because I have been in that boy's situation. Some days I stand before the mirror, I see my body and I look at the scars from self-harm. And I tell myself, boy, you made it. You made it. So this piece, and I'm just so grateful that this piece is going to be published. You know, this issue is very sensitive in the Pacific region. It is something that's a taboo. We don't talk about it because of our religious views. So for the allies, I thank you so much. But mostly this is for that little boy or girl that may have been in my shoes. I hope you flip through this piece and it gives you some kind of hope. It gives you some kind of encouragement. Like one of the speakers said, poetry is a very powerful medium. It can bring you joy. So I hope this piece gives people the encouragement that have been in my shoes, that are part of the LGBTQI community. And once again, thank you.
Thank you, Shamil, for your really powerful piece and for your courage. I'm a bit of a crybaby, so. But you know, I just wanted to share this with you. So about 25 years ago, which gives away my age, but quite a while ago, I was a secondary school teacher before coming to USP, and one of the research projects that I started that I never finished simply because it became far too sensitive to deal with ethically. But I spent time with 6 young people who were high school students at the time who were engaging in self-harm. And the issues that they were going through, you know, ranged from domestic issues to sexuality to what now, I guess, retrospectively may have been some early signs of mental health issues that weren't dealt with, the causes of which hadn't been uncovered or unpacked. And the only reason these students were willing to talk to me was because I was a teacher that they trusted and knew personally. But the signs were all there. Kids are stabbing themselves in the classroom with a compass. They are, and this was 2 decades ago, you know, the situation. They're getting much smarter now. There was this little fad where they would wear shirts and they would wear the long sleeve kind of skinny sweaters underneath. And, you know, in my kind of outdated old mind, I thought it was a cool thing, like it was a cool trend, when in fact a lot of them were hiding, you know, the scars of self-harm. And so they would, you know, I also took art class, so, you know, we'd use the stencil cutters all the time. Some of them had a range of sizes. One of the young women talked about heating a blade before putting it to her skin because the searing sound and the sensation of skin slashing was the release that was needed to get away from the challenges and problems experienced. So yeah, I get very emotional when I hear young people talk about suicide and self-harm because there's so much silence around it. And teachers are ill-equipped to deal with it. And I know that the teacher that I was would have loved this collection. I had a 12-year-old girl in 3rd form who in the middle of class climbed under the table and started strangling herself with a piece of rope. And I know this is being live streamed, so the young woman may see me speaking. I hope she's doing really well. I know she migrated with her family, but I know the other students who were in that class will be hearing this story and will remember the trauma of it. A week later, she was stabbing herself with a compass. A couple of days later, she was drinking granola in the school toilet. It was a series of issues, and do you know what the problem was? I thought it was sexual abuse. It was not achieving academically to parental expectations. She was in the top quartile, scoring 18 out of 20. The response she would get was, it's not 100%. It's not 20 out of 20. 18 is not good enough. You got 98 in maths, it's not 100. She'd skipped so many classes, she was 12 in 3rd form. And this was the lived reality. But as a teacher, you care, they trust you. They don't give you the skills to deal with or handle such sensitive issues. So thank you so much for sharing that, Shamil. I'm sure that teachers out there in the region and students going through this will definitely hear your voice. They will find connection with it, and it will definitely give teachers material to tackle some of those extremely sensitive issues. So yes, I went on a little bit. I apologize for that. I just feel extremely, you know, so strongly about this issue. But we have 2 wonderful artists in our midst. I will now introduce Mr. Joseph Hing, who is a visual artist and photographer from Fiji, and he will talk to us about his beautiful piece titled, I Look at My Mom.
Ooh, my heart's beating. First of all, hi Sheldon. I'd like to thank everyone involved in this project for giving visual artists the platform and the opportunity to share our work alongside these beautiful poems. My piece, I Look at My Mom. It was my way of paying homage to my mom because at one point in my life, I got caught up with all these worldly things that I forgot to even pick up the phone and tell my mom. Francis emailed. This was very close to my heart, but then I stumbled across this short poem that really sealed everything for me and allowed me to complete this. I'll just read it to you. So it goes like this. The strength of a woman is carrying the burden of family without expectations that someone will feel her pain or cry her tears. The strength of a woman is the first one to wake up and the last to go to bed. The strength of a woman is to pretty and doll up all the masks she has to wear in order to survive. The strength of a woman is crying herself to sleep at night, then embracing you in the morning with a hug and a smile. The strength of a woman is my mother. A woman who says she's okay when you can tell she's in pain. A woman who smiles when the going gets tough. And a woman who finds laughter after crying. This is my mother. And this is my homage to her. I hope you're inspired by this piece. And I hope it inspires you to go home, give your mom a hug, or give her a call and tell her that you love her. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joseph. A beautiful piece. And last but not least, we will hear from Mr. Tui Lendua, a very well-known local illustrator and digital artist, also from Fiji, on his piece titled Perfect Peace. Tui.
Bulla. This piece was, it was a concept sketch. It wasn't supposed to be published. So it was for my my children's Sunday school. They needed a Christmas card. So this was about, so for Christmas, I wanted to do something that related to us. So the wise men, when they heard that Christ was born and they saw the star in the east, they traveled long and far to get to where they were going. And our ancestors, our people of the Pacific, when we needed to go somewhere, we used the stars in the same way. And we traveled long and far. They weren't deserts, but these were endless oceans, that were oceans. But that's what this was about. It's about going places. It was about traveling. And when they asked me, oh, could you give us, do you have any pieces? So I sent a piece, and they asked, oh, what's the name of this piece? And it's like, oh, that's JPEG 119, because it was just there. So it forced me to think about it. And Francis knows, because it took a while to reply. So I grew up in a small town in the UK, and it was just me and my parents. So we'd drive. We'd love to go out on drives, and we'd go and visit other Fijian families. around Europe. And when we go to the shops, as a kid, as a 4-year-old, 3-year-old kid, I'd look up and mum and dad were there. And on the dashboard was all just yellows and reds, ambers and reds, you know. But every so often we'd go off track. So we'd have to go out of developed places. So we'd be on country roads and we'd be traveling through these windswept moors, and there'll be all these gnarled trees, and it's all dark outside and it's cold, and it looks scary. And you looked out the window and you know, oh, that's where there are werewolves and vampires, and they're all out there. You can't see them, but they're there, and it's scary. But inside the car, it's warm and you feel safe. But when you look on the dashboard and all the lights there are red and ambers, there was this blue light that would pop up on those special occasions, the high beam light. So when I would see that blue high beam light, and it's different from all the other lights on the dashboard, I'd feel safe. So that's what that blue is. That was my safety. I would look at that and I'd feel safe. I'm warm, I'm protected. I'm traveling somewhere with people I love. And that's what that is about. It's not one canoe going. It's you are traveling with people that you love. And just what I want to share with you guys, it's your perspective. Like I've told people about, oh, this is people traveling, but the blue light on the dashboard, that's the perspective from a 4-year-old kid who's traveling with his parents. And that was my perspective. And what I want to encourage artists and poets and whoever you are, your perspective counts. Share your perspective, because your perspective, your viewpoint on things is so important, because all the big voices are heard. The small voices need to be heard. Manaka, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Tui. So that kind of ends that segment. But please, ladies and gentlemen, join me in putting your hands together to thank the poets and artists. Not just the ones here today, but also in acknowledging the writers and artists whose works have been featured in the collection, but due to other circumstances, including COVID restrictions, couldn't be with us today. And now the moment that we've all been waiting for. Can I ask the EU representative, Ms. Galia Agisheva, to please come forward again to officially launch the anthology. Ladies and gentlemen, I need to ask to bear with us, as the media team will want to capture the moment. So these are the young people. All right, so just to explain exactly what is happening, we have here a group of young people who represent the youth of the region. So we have young people who will be gifted with copies of the anthology. Yes. Thank you very much. We've now come to the final segment of our program, and it's a pleasure to invite one of the Pacific's foremost defenders of human rights, Shamima Ali, to deliver the closing remarks. Shamima Ali is the coordinator of the Fiji Women's Crisis Center, a position she has held since 1986. She is a past Fiji Human Rights Commissioner, a recipient of Amnesty International's New Zealand inaugural Human Rights Defender Award, and a Paul Harris Fellow, Rotary Foundation of Rotary International Award. She is a founding member of the 16 Days of Activism Against Gender Violence campaign and a founding member of Asia Pacific Women Law and Development. Shamima is the chair of the Pacific Women's Network Against Violence Against Women, which includes 26 organizations from 9 countries in the Pacific. She's a key trainer of the FWCC Regional Training Program, which is conducted twice a year. Please welcome Shamima Ali.
Thank you very much. Nisambul Vinaka, Namaste, Assalamu Alaikum. Friends, colleagues, students, the poets, the artists. I'm honored and delighted to be here this afternoon for the launch of Rising Tide. This anthology of poems on human rights, social justice, and I will add feminism. I wish the title had added that on, and give this closing address. Thank you so much for inviting me. We have had such inspiring performances, recitals, and it's wonderful to hear firsthand the experiences of artists and poets. This is a welcome addition to creative expressions that have taken place over the years in the Pacific. My first experience of Pacific poetry, of course, was in the 70s with Konai. And at that time, I didn't know that Pacific Islanders could write, that we Pacific Islanders could write poetry. It was a very, very great introduction to poetry, and of course, followed by the great Epeli Haufa, the late great Epeli Haufa, and many more after that. Then at every meeting and training of the Pacific Women's Network Against Violence Against Women, I tell you, the poetry was just spewing out of these women at the end of it, without even us asking. When we asked them to do an evaluation, they would write poetry, expressing their experiences of violence, discrimination, inequality, and inequality. We have used these poems extensively in our advocacy work on gender, violence against women, and human rights. This culminated in the book of poems entitled Beneath Paradise. I'm so happy to see some of these poems in this anthology, and great leaders, activists, and poets like the late Grace Melissa from Vanuatu, Linda Passingan from Rabaul in Papua New Guinea included. They would be so chuffed their poems live on, and especially they will be used in schools. Thank you, RRT, for this initiative to use poetry on human rights, violence against women, and gender equality in our daily work. What is more encouraging is that these issues will now be discussed by students in schools. We have an opportunity here to educate young minds on the negative impacts of violence against women and girls, and the impact when half of the world's population are not treated equally. It is reassuring to see critical reflection questions on these issues alongside the poems. And I wholeheartedly commend this resource to all teachers and classrooms across the Pacific. This is an opportune time to do this. With the COVID-19 pandemic limiting spaces for human rights and feminism in Fiji and the Pacific and throughout the world. Such work is not possible without the support of donors, and I am pleased to see the European Union investing in violence prevention work. This is also a good sign, and also for other donors to follow suit. There is hope when we can influence young minds to build a just, equal society and to prevent violence from happening in the first place. I have worked in this space, as you've heard, for over 30 years, and I'll most probably die promoting women's human rights and the elimination of all forms of violence against women. But I've seen the changes. We each in this room have a responsibility to ensure we play a part in this. And the Fiji Women's Crisis Center stands ready to work with anyone who wants to join in this very, very vital work. Thank you to the performers, the artists, the poets, and congratulations once again, and thank you to Triple RT and Nilesh Gaunder's strong powers of persuasion in roping everyone in, and everyone who has worked to make this anthology possible. Vinakavakalevu, Shukriya, Thandipat.
Thank you so much for your closing remarks and for the impactful work that you continue to do for our women and girls. Still on the theme of women, I don't know how many of you have the program with you, but you'll certainly see it on the book cover. I wanted to draw your attention to the symbolism of Pacific motifs used in the text, used in the anthology. So the motifs you see in the book and on the program are derived from female-specific tattoo designs. As someone who has a personal interest in Pacific symbols as text and a researcher of these narratives, I think it's really important for us to recognize the power also of heritage arts and voices. And I thank the Triple RT team at SPC for including this in the design. The Samoan female tattoo, for example, the malu, which is featured on the thighs, and the tapulima or sacred hen tattoo, are very symbolic and contain sacred imagery. They speak of the cultural significance of the roles of women and the sacred covenant of protection and sanctity that we accord to them as our daughters, as our sisters, as our wives, and as the mothers of the land. So this text really brings to the classroom multiple layers of our Pacific story that teachers and students can unpack and use to stimulate further conversations about human rights and social justice in the context of our lived Pacific experiences. And that brings me to the end of the program. And it gives me great pleasure to invite you to please join us with some light refreshments to view the art exhibition just out this exit, which feature the artworks and illustrations from the collection. It also features a selection of poems with activities, so you can see firsthand what that looks like. For those of you here at USB or in Suva, you want to bring others along to view the exhibition, you may do so over the next 2 weeks. The exhibition will continue at the Oceania Center. So without further ado, Vinaka Vakalevu, God bless. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, malo to the Triple RT team. Kudos to Nilesh and company.